We are going to look at the 6 trig ratios in all 4 quadrants in this video. You will want to have in front of you your unit circle paper, and we are really going to focus on these 2 triangles down here at the bottom. And I want you to write a couple things next to the triangle. So here's the first one. Tangent of theta equals sine theta over cosine theta. Okay, so this is not immediately obvious. Let's look at why this is true. So I'm going to put sine theta over cosine theta. Okay, let's think about the ratios for each one of those. When I write the ratios, I'm just going to write the first initial. I'm not going to write out the whole word just to simplify things a little. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. All right, so look at this. Think about it from a mathematical standpoint, arithmetic. I have a fraction divided by a fraction. And you may remember when you learned this in middle school, when we do fraction divided by fraction, we keep the first one, change the division to multiplication, and we flip the second one. So keep, change, flip, you may remember doing that in the past. Keep, change, reciprocal, lots of different ways you could say that. And if I look at this multiplication problem I have here, I see that I can cross divide and get rid of the h's. And so then what I have left is opposite over adjacent, which is our ratio for tangent theta. So that's why it works out that tangent theta is equal to sine theta over cosine theta. That's going to be really important a little bit later in the video. All right, so the reciprocal of tangent, you remember, is cotangent. So if tangent theta is sine over cosine, it makes sense that cosine theta would be the reciprocal of that, cosine over sine. Okay, write this one on your paper next to the triangles as well. To help you remember, cotangent of theta is going to go with cosine of theta. When you see cotangent, cosine should go on the top. And hopefully that will help you keep straight in your mind which one is which one. Okay, let's do a couple practice problems similar to what we did in the last video. If I'm going to do the sine of 270, I'm going to start here at 0, and I'm going to go in a positive direction around the unit circle, 90, 180, 270. So I'm going to end up right here on the quadrantal angle. And remember when we looked at those, we just did the coordinates of the point as if we were graphing on x and y axes without the circle being there at all. So for this point, I went right and left none, and I went down 1. So the coordinates of that point are 0, -1. And if you remember from what we talked about before, sine goes with the y coordinate, so therefore sine of 270 is going to be -1. If I had asked you for cosine of this one, cosine goes with the x coordinate, so cosine of 270 would have been 0. All right, let's look at this one. Cosine of -240. Okay, so this time I'm going to go in a negative direction around the unit circle. So I've got 90, 180. All right, 270 is too far. So how far did I need to go from 180 to get to 240? All right, so here's -240 degrees. 240 minus 180, well, that's 60. So that tells me that my reference angle is going to be 60. I'm 60 degrees away from the horizontal. Remember, we always measure our reference angles from the horizontal, never from the vertical. All right, so cosine. Let's remember the ratio for cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So thinking about my 30, 60, 90 triangle, which I'm working really hard on memorizing, right? And I see it down there at the bottom of my paper. The adjacent side to 60 is 1. And the hypotenuse of my 30, 60, 90 triangle is 2. Okay, so now I need to think about the sine of this angle. And I don't mean S-I-N-E, I mean S-I-G-N, like whether it's positive or negative. All right, if you remember that little phrase we did, all students take calculus, S was in the second quadrant, S for sine. So if sine and cosecant are positive, that means cosine is negative. So the final answer to cosine of -240 degrees is -1/2. All right, let's look at some that we do not have the coordinates for. So this is where your triangles really start coming in handy. So the tangent of -150. So again, I'm going to go in a negative direction, 90, but not all the way to 180. How far do I have to back up from 180 to get to 150? Remember, I don't want to measure from 90. I want to measure from the horizontal, measure from 180. And I'm going to go backwards. Here's negative 150 degrees. And that reference angle, I draw my triangle, the reference angle is going to be 30. I'm 30 degrees away from 180 at 150. Okay, so now tangent. Think about the ratio. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So the opposite of 30 in my 30, 60, 90 triangle is 1. The adjacent of 30 is the square root of 3. And I remember from what I've done before that I cannot leave a square root in the denominator. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3. In the numerator, 1 times square root of 3 is square root of 3. And in the denominator, square root of 3 times square root of 3, remember that's the same thing as square root of 3 squared, which is going to work out to be just plain 3. Okay, now let's try to figure out whether we're going to be positive or negative. So all students take. T for take in the third quadrant. T goes with tangent, so tangent is positive. My final answer, square root of 3 over 3. All right, how about secant of 315? This time I'm going to go in a positive direction. So 90, 180, 270, but not all the way to 360. How far do I have to back up from 360 to get to 315 degrees? 360 minus 315 is 45. So my reference angle on this one is 45 degrees. Okay, secant. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So for secant, I'm going to want hypotenuse and adjacent. Okay, so let's see what those are. Hypotenuse of my 36 or my 45, 45, 90 triangle is square root of 2. The adjacent side is 1, and square root of 2 over 1 is square root of 2. Whoops. There we go. Let's try that again. Square root of 2. Okay, so now we need to figure out whether it should be positive or negative. So all students take calculus. C for calculus in the fourth quadrant. Calculus goes, or C goes with cosine. Cosine is the reciprocal of secant. So if cosine is positive, secant is also positive. So therefore, positive square root of 2 turns out to be my final answer. All right, cotangent of negative 180. All right, let's move in a negative direction. So I'm going to go negative 90, negative 180 right there. There's my negative 180. Okay, so again, I can do the coordinates. I went one place to the left and no places up or down. Some of the coordinates of that point, negative 1, 0. Okay, so now we're going to use that little phrase that you put down earlier. The other way of remembering cotangent besides adjacent over opposite, cotangent is going to be cosine of negative 180 over the sine of negative 180. Okay, so now think about what your coordinates mean. Cosine goes with x. So cosine of negative 180 is negative 1. Sine goes with y. So sine of negative 180 is 0. Well, anytime I divide anything other than 0 by 0, I get undefined. So my answer to this question is undefined. The cotangent of negative 180 is undefined. All right, how about this one? Cosecant of 30. Well, acute angles are a little bit easier. If I move in a positive direction, 30 degrees, and I draw my reference angle, or my right triangle, my reference angle I know is going to be 30 degrees because it's an acute angle. So that's what I wanted. Okay, cosecant. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Sine is hypotenuse over opposite, or cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite because it's the reciprocal of sine. So I know from my 30, 60, 90 triangle that the hypotenuse is 2. And the side opposite 30 is 1. 2 over 1 is 2. And you remember in my first quadrant, I have A for all, and all of them are positive. So therefore, my answer to cosecant of 30 is positive 2. All right, let's do tangent of 300. All right, I'm going to move in a clockwise manner around a counterclockwise manner because it's positive. So I'm going to go 90, 180, 270, but not all the way to 360, right? I can't get to 360. How far do I need to back up to get to 300 degrees? Well, if you subtract 360 minus 300, my reference angle is 60. Remember, we're going to measure our reference angle from the horizontal axis, not from the vertical. So reference angle there is 60. All right, tangent. Ratio for tangent, opposite over adjacent. So the opposite side of 60 is square root of 3. The adjacent side of 60 is 1. Square root of 3 over 1 is just square root of 3. Okay, now let's figure out if it's going to be positive or negative. All students take calculus, C for calculus. Well, C goes with cosine. Cosine and secant are positive in the fourth quadrant. That means tangent is going to be negative. So my final answer here, negative square root of 3 for tangent. All right, let's do cotangent. Cotangent, negative 225. Okay, so now we're going to go clockwise. We're going to go in a negative manner. So let's see what I've got here. I've got 90, 180, 270. Okay, 270 is too much. Go back to 180. How far from 180 do we need to go to get to negative 225? Well, if I subtract that, I'm going to get that my reference angle is 45 degrees. All right, cotangent. Cotangent, the reciprocal of tangent. So the ratio for cotangent, adjacent over opposite. All right, for my 45, 45, 90 triangle, both the adjacent and the opposite are 1. Remember, that's my isosceles triangle. 1 divided by 1 is 1. All right, let's figure out positive or negative. So all students, S for students, S goes with sine and cosecant. Those are positive, so therefore cotangent is going to be negative. Negative 1 is going to be the answer for cotangent of negative 225. All right, let's do this one. Secant of negative 30. So negative means I'm going to go down, and I'm going to go down 30 degrees. So again, that's already an acute angle, so I don't need to do any adding or subtracting. My reference angle here is going to be 30. Okay, secant. Secant is the opposite or the reciprocal of cosine. So therefore, secant is going to be hypotenuse over adjacent, as cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so it's the reciprocal, hypotenuse over adjacent. Okay, the hypotenuse of the 30, 60, 90 triangle is 2. The side that is adjacent to 30 is the square root of 3. And just like before, I can't leave that square root of 3 in the denominator, so I need to multiply by square root of 3 on the top and the bottom. So in the numerator, I get 2 square root of 3. And in the denominator, square root of 3 times square root of 3 is 3. Okay, let's figure out positive and negative. So all students take calculus. C in the fourth quadrant for cosine. Cosine is positive. That means secant is also positive because secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So my final answer, positive 2 square root of 3 over 3. All right, how about this one? Cosecant of 240. All right, this time I'm going to go positive. So I'm going to go counterclockwise. 90, 180, 270 is too far. So how far from 180 do I need to go to get to 240 degrees? Well, if I subtract 240 minus 180, I'm going to get a reference angle of 60. Okay, cosecant. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so therefore cosecant will be hypotenuse over opposite. The hypotenuse of the 30, 60, 90 triangle is 2. Opposite of 60 is square root of 3. We just rationalized this one on the last screen. 2 square root of 3 over 3. And in the third quadrant, we've already said is T for tangent. So therefore, cosecant must be negative. Negative 2 square root of 3 over 3.